It's DJ HIV, 90.3 KDVS from the Swear Jar, and this is what's in my bin. I try pushing electronic music as much as I can, but in my bin I only have, actually I don't have any electronic records, but mainly just indie and some jazz and a lot of variety. Casiotone for the Painfully Alone. So I first heard this album when I was about 10, I think. This was in grade 5. I picked up my sister's old Casiotone keyboard that Owen Ashworth from, I think he's now called Advanced Bass. He lives in Chicago, and he made this album completely on an old 1980s Casiotone keyboard, and he only used the white keys on it, which I thought was pretty cool. Really cool, really high schooly, emotional stuff, like, you know, cheesy heartbreak. And if you ever miss a girl, this is a record that you should play. A lot of really cute sounding stuff, but it's also very intimate in the same way, because it's just him and his keyboard. And he actually played in Davis at the Coffee House, I think in 2009, which was around the time I actually heard this. Really cool record, you should check that out. Daniel Johnston, one of my favorite artists of all time. Always followed his stuff. This is 1990. Still a staple on the Swear Jar. Even though I play electronic music, I always try and play like some of my influences, or maybe scratch a record in there. I always play Deviltown, the little acapella bit that he has in this. The, I was living in a devil town. Well, it's simply eerie, creepy, everything you'd need for a start of a show, where I just start playing like jungle or drum and bass, or maybe some hardcore, and completely throws everyone off guard, which is kind of my thing. At the back you got a lovely picture of him in his younger days. In the end. You'd Prefer an Astronaut by Hum, 1995, space rock. This is another album I have from high school. Kind of took influences from everywhere, a little shoegaze, a little experimental stuff, but they were famous for two things. Their song Stars, which is actually the hit song of this record, was featured in a Cadillac commercial. So a lot of people were like, oh, why is this in KDVS? This is too mainstream, because of that Cadillac commercial. But if you were to talk about them now, not many people know about them. But in '95, they got a fair amount of appeal. I think they appeared on the Howard Stern show, his radio show, a couple of times. Howard Stern. Anyway, yeah, really good record, really weird artwork. It's just got a zebra on there. My favorite songs of this one are probably The Pod, which is one of the more aggressive songs on this, and you hear Matt Talbot, the lead singer. This record right here is a jazz record. This is Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain. I actually found out about this record through a hardcore band called, well, they're called Screamo, but like technically they were a hardcore band. That was Saeta back in 1999. They only had one album called A Retrospective, kind of pioneering the entire like real Screamo days of the late 90s. Definitely inspired by Rites of Spring and Fugazi, but they were big jazz heads, and they were really into this album. And there's a song on here called Saeta, or Saeta, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Saeta themselves actually took that word from a misprint in one of the pressings of this record, which misspelled Saeta as Satia, and that's how they got their band name. And they were only around for about 3 years, but that's how I found this record, because of them and their Wikipedia page back in 2007. And it was super amazing. This record blew my mind. It was so experimental, so dense, and just really atmospheric as well for a jazz record. That really blew me away. And I had not much experience with jazz, and this is kind of like, I think when he was veering off into his more experimental stuff, but I've definitely started some of my shows off with this, just playing the intro track or playing Saeta itself. So for my last pick, I have a record that's very dear to my heart. This is David Bowie's Space Oddity, but this is the radio version. I first heard it very, very young because my dad wasn't super into David Bowie, but he would always play Space Oddity because when he was going to school in 1968, I think, that's when that record had just been released, and you had this weirdo on stage, David Bowie, you know, pretending he's on Mars and pretending he's, you know, in space and just having the time of his life. And I think that's something that David Bowie really let people have a voice for themselves and let people be themselves. After my dad passed away, I always thought of David Bowie as like Space Oddity, that song, as his descent to heaven, because in Space Oddity as well, you have Major Tom, the main character, descending into space. So every time I listen to that Space Oddity record, it's just like thinking about a soul departing Earth, which is something that has always been something that I hold very dear to me because of my father passing away. So every time I go to the graveyard, and afterwards me and my brother sit in the car, and we don't really say a word to each other after the graveyard, but we always play Space Oddity, David Bowie, no matter what, because it reminds us of our dad, and it was one of his favorite songs. So yeah, David Bowie, shout out David Bowie, rest in peace. You had the biggest impact on my life, and my favorite song of all time, KDVS 90.3.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom.
Pull it up, my selector. If you want to tune into my show, The Swear Jar, 9 to 11 p.m. on Saturdays, jungle, drum and bass, breakbeat, UK garage, dubstep, all that and more. Pull up rewinds, pull it up, pull it up. Although I advertise a lot of rock, jazz, and a lot of weird stuff, it just shows how diverse KDVS is and how many cool records that we have down here. My favorite place to be on the planet, actually. I spend most of my time here, even as an engineering student. So yeah, KDVS 90.3, The Swear Jar. This is DJ HIV. This has been What's in My Bin.